Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amy Woods, the Executive Director of Alumni Relations at Marist and a graduate from the class of 1997. We're very excited to present this webinar to you today, featuring Marist alumnus, Stan Phelps. If you encounter any audio issues, you do have the option to dial in by telephone. We are going to put the phone number in the chat box in a second that you can use. Due to the number of participants, we have muted all lines except for the hosts. And we're going to reserve the chat feature for any technical questions you might have for the Marist staff who are listening in. And we're going to save the Q&A feature for any questions you might have for Stan. So please send your questions directly to me, the host, so I can get them to Stan, as it's hard for him to monitor that Q&A field while he's presenting. There are several ways you can view this presentation on your screen. If you hover over the top right corner of the video portion of your screen with your mouse, you should see a few icons. We found the preferred view for something like this would be active speaker view, since Stan's slides are going to be behind him on that screen. They won't be in a presentation on your screen, so you would just do active speaker view. There will be a brief survey on your screen at the conclusion of the webinar with 5 questions, very simple. So please take a moment to answer those when it pops up after this is over. So I would like to introduce Stan now. Stan graduated from Marist in 1991. He is an IBM futurist, certified speaking professional, TEDx speaker, Forbes Contributor, and has spoken at over 250 events. Stan has spoken on every inhabited continent in over a dozen countries for Fortune 100 brands such as IBM, Target, ESPN, UPS, GlaxoSmithKline, and Citi. Prior to focusing on writing and speaking, Stan held leadership positions at IMG, Adidas, and the PGA. He also spent 7 years as Chief Solutions Officer at Synergy, an award-winning marketing agency. At Synergy, he helped create larger-than-life brand experiences for brands such as KFC, M&M's, Walmart, and Starbucks. Stan received his BS in Marketing and Human Resources from Marist, a JD and MBA from Villanova University, and a certificate for achieving breakthrough service from Harvard Business School. He is a faculty member on ANA's School of Marketing and also serves as an adjunct instructor at Rutgers Business School. Stan, thanks for joining us today and sharing your expertise with us.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy. And I want to thank everyone for just taking the next hour. I think it's one of the most important skills that we have as professionals. And it's this idea of being able to come across loud and clear. So today I'm going to share the 10 keys to how you deliver a memorable business presentation. And here's the thing, each and every one of us is always presenting. I don't care if you're a new grad and you're about to go out and do interviews, if you're in business development and sales, everyone is presenting all the time. Even if it's an update to your team, or if you end up speaking at a conference or other presentation. Amy gave a little bit of my background. Essentially, the work that I do is looking at the future of both the customer experience and the employee experience. And today we're going to talk about the 10th color in this Goldfish series of books. It's called the Silver Goldfish. But I'm coming to you today from down in North Carolina in a place called the Research Triangle Park. My office is located in a building called the Frontier. And I moved down here to North Carolina about 8 years ago with my wife, Jennifer, and I have 2 boys, Thomas and James. And a little known fact, if anyone's a fan of reality TV here, if you're a fan of HGTV, when we made the move from Connecticut 8 years ago down to North Carolina, my family and I did the show House Hunters. And so I tell people all the time, I learned very quickly that there's not a lot of reality in reality television. So let's jump in. Today is all about being a more effective communicator. So let's start. We're going to start with a myth the problem and the truth when it comes to communication. And here's the myth. What's the biggest myth out there as it relates to communication? What's the biggest myth? It's the illusion that it has actually taken place. So we might have just done a presentation, we've walked out of that meeting, or we walked off the stage and someone patted us on the back and said, "Oh, great job." And then when you ask them what you presented on or what you spoke about, very few times can someone actually tell you what the focus was of the presentation. So the biggest myth is the idea that it actually has taken place. A lot of times we fool ourselves when we present. Simply just finishing a presentation isn't the goal. It's actually being memorable so that when you finish, people remember what you said. So if that's the myth, then what is the problem? So the problem is that the fear of speaking and presenting is actually greater than the fear of dying. How does that even make sense? And it's based on how our brain works. We sense that when we get up to speak and present, that it's a threat to our personal identity. And it's the part of our brain that senses that threat, which also gauges kind of a life and death response, that fight or flight. Jerry Seinfeld perhaps put it the best when he said, "Does it make any sense at all?" He says, "Think about that. That means to the average person that if you went to a funeral, right, that you'd rather be in the casket than giving the eulogy." Right? It doesn't make sense, but it's true. Americans and people's greatest fear is glossophobia, the fear of actual speaking. So if that's the problem, then what is the truth? And we have to go to Mark Twain, a legendary humorist who was an amazing public speaker by all accounts. And he said very prophetically, he said, if that's the problem, here's the truth. He said, there's only two types of speakers. He said, one, those that are nervous, and two, those that are liars. So here's the thing. Our biology is millions of years of hardwiring. Myself, who's given now over 400 presentations on stage, every time before I go on stage, I can feel those butterflies and that nervous energy. So that's kind of the truth. Here's kind of the challenge then. The challenge is that no one on this webinar right now, not even myself, was born a presenter. So that's a blessing and a curse. It's a curse in the fact that this is not a naturally God-given talent. And if you want to learn how to become great at presenting, it's just a skill that you can acquire. And the more that you lean in to do more and more presentations, the more comfortable you get and the better you get when you present. So the solution for this is what we call in the book the silver goldfish. Again, it's the 10th color in this goldfish series. So obviously the goldfish is a metaphor. Let me tell you a little bit of background of why it is a goldfish. So the goldfish relates to me, and when I was 6 years old, because my very own first pet was a goldfish. I want you to think back to when you had your very own first pet. In fact, if you want to be brave, say hello in the chat. Tell me what your first pet was. Were you a dog, cat, hamster, turtle? I'm always interested if there's a unique one that comes up. But feel free to throw that into the chat. For me, it was a goldfish, and I'll never forget it. I went to a carnival. It was like a spring carnival, and I was 6 years old. I threw the ping pong ball, and I'll never forget it. I came home with my very first pet, a goldfish. Now, yeah, I remember the goldfish I got was tiny. And it turns out that goldfish on average only grow to be 3 inches in length. And to put that in perspective, the average person, their thumb is 3 inches in length. And I'm seeing some responses here. Dog, turtle, okay. No cat people, that's okay. No judgment. So if the average goldfish is 3 inches, I was stunned when I started writing to find out what the world's largest goldfish is. Now, not a koi or a carp, just an average common ordinary goldfish. You're looking at it right here. This is the Guinness World Record holder. It's nearly 20 inches. Think about that for a second. It's 6 times the size of an average goldfish. So you have to ask yourself, like, how is that even possible? Well, it turns out if you're a goldfish, your growth is impacted by 5 things. And here's the thing, those same 5 things apply to the growth of you and any business that you're in. So we're going to break down the 5 growth factors and kind of explore this metaphor of a goldfish. So the first thing for a goldfish, and most people have probably heard this before, their growth is going to be impacted by the size of the bowl or the pond that goldfish is in. So the bigger the bowl, the bigger the pond, the more the goldfish grows. So it's a direct correlation. But in business, if you had to imagine what's the equivalent of the size of the bowl or the pond is, it's simply this. It's the market for your product or for your background or degree, right? The second thing for a goldfish that affects their growth, it's determined by the amount of other goldfish that are in the bowl or the pond. And this one's an inverse relationship, right? So the more goldfish that there are, the harder it's going to be to grow. The less goldfish there are, the more they can typically grow. So who are the other goldfish if you're looking for a job, or if you're in business? Who are the other goldfish? They're your competition. Right? Here's number 3. Number 3 is the surrounding for a goldfish. So for a goldfish, it's the quality of the water that they're in. And the more nutrients that are in the water, the less cloudy the water is, the more the goldfish will grow. If there are no nutrients in the water, it's oxygen starved. If it's extremely cloudy, it's harder for the goldfish to grow. So what's that surrounding environment if you're in business? It's simply this. It's the economy. And I don't have to tell anyone who's on this webinar right now, this is a big factor we're all dealing with. We're in the midst of a global pandemic. For me, I'm someone who makes my living by getting on a plane and going to events. We're all being affected by the environment. All right, so we've had, what did we have so far? The size of the bowl was the market. The other goldfish were your competition. Now we've had the quality of the water, which is the economy. Here's number 4. How a goldfish does in their first 4 months of life will determine ultimately how big they get. So how do they get out of the gate is absolutely key, because when they're born, they're tiny. They have 100 brothers and sisters. And in fact, A baby goldfish is called a fry, as in small fry. They are minute when they're born. So the first 4 months is key to their future growth. So if you're in business, what's the equivalent of the first 120 days? That's simply what? That's when you are a startup, or if you have a new product or service that you launch, or even if you go on a job search. How you do in these early days will be a factor of how it will impact your future growth. Number 5 for a goldfish, their growth is also impacted by this: genetic makeup. So what is that goldfish born with, right, that separates it from all of the other goldfish? And typically, the more that they're separated and the stronger their genes are, the bigger they get. If their genes are weak and they're like everyone else, all of the other goldfish, the less they typically grow. So if you're in business, what's genetic, or you're in a job search, what is genetic makeup? Genetic makeup is this: it's the extent that you are differentiated, how you're different from everyone else. How do you stand out in what I would call a sea of sameness? Now, here's the thing: I'm going to assume that most of you have been in a job. Hopefully you have a job and you've been in it for more than 4 months, more than 120 days. So of these 5 factors, let's throw out number 4. Of the remaining 4, what do you have control over? Does anyone have control over the market? Probably not. How about your competition? No. Certainly no one has control over the economy. If you do, please see me after this webinar. I would love to talk to you, right? The only thing you have control over is what? How you differentiate what you do and how you do it. And I'm going to tell you this: your ability to be an effective communicator and your ability to present well over the course of your career is going to be one of the biggest differentiators that you can have. It will overcome a lot of things in your career. It is so important to be able to differentiate and stand out. So the goldfish is simply a metaphor for growth through differentiation, standing out. So if that's the goldfish piece, why the silver piece? And the silver is an ode to my late father. 5 summers ago, he passed away at the age of 85. John Phelps, Sr. At the age of 17, my dad wasn't a really good student in school, so at 17, he left school. His mom signed him in to the U.S. Army Air Force all the way back in 1947. And after he finished basic training, he ended up going down to Monmouth County in New Jersey, and he went to Signal Corps school. So Signal Corps is the branch of the military that supports all the different branches in terms of communication. And my dad studied specifically radio communication back in 1948. Anyhow, when you were studying radio communication, you were always trying to measure the effectiveness of a radio signal. So when somebody was coming across on the radio, they're always trying to gauge how well they were coming through. And it turns out that they would always measure based on just 2 factors, 2 critical factors: strength and readability. All right. And so they had a scale that was based on this idea of being on a 1 to 5 scale. So you have clarity here on the vertical, and on over here you have volume, which is more about the strength of the signal. And the idea was that you wanted to be here in the top right. If you were coming through perfectly, you were coming through what they called 5 by 5. So we've all heard the phrase 5 by 5 before, but we don't know it as 5 by 5. We simply know it as loud and clear. Right? Loud and clear. And if we think about the first bit, when we present, that loudness bit is not about how loud we can get our voice. No. More often than not, there's no problem with people not being able to hear us. People can hear us fine. The volume or the loudness is about being able to rise above distractions and engage with the audience. So you can captivate their attention and be able to communicate your message. So the loud is about rising above distraction. The clear is about this idea of how do you organize your message in a way that it becomes clear and memorable to the audiences that you present to. And so what I want to do is spend about the next 15 minutes. I'm going to give you 10 specific tips. We'll call them the tip box. We'll call them tips, which I like to say tips to improve presentation skills. I'm a big acronym guy. So we'll share the 10 keys to coming across loud and clear. And 5 of those keys are going to be about coming across loud, and 5 are going to be about organizing your message in a way that it comes across clear. So let's start with the first one. Let's start with the 10 keys of being loud and clear. And the first one is this. It's what we call impress, right? So here's the thing. You go into an interview, you walk up on a stage at a conference, you walk into a meeting. Before a word comes out of your mouth to present, people have already started to make an impression about you, mainly by the way that you dress. So before we even get into the communication and rising above distraction, you want to make sure that what you're wearing is with the audience, right? It's not too above what the expectation of the audience is. But you want to at least be a tie or a little bit above a tie. You want to be able to dress to, we say dress to impress. Because 80% of how people judge you comes down to 2 things: warmth and competence. And that's before a word comes out of your mouth. The way you dress communicates both the warmth and the competence. The second of the 5 for loud is this idea of connecting with your audience. And what's the quickest way to connect? We're hardwired as human beings to respond to stories. Sure, you could share all sorts of facts, but it's not going to be memorable. We remember things through story. So simply, how do you present if you're in an interview situation? A challenge, set up the challenge, decide what the plan was, how you addressed it, and then lastly, the result. So we call it CPR: challenge, plan, result. That's the 3 elements of almost every good story. Facts tell, but stories sell. The third part of becoming across loud is this idea of expressing yourself. And one of the things that we have to realize that when we communicate something with feeling, that only 7% of what we communicate, if it's about feeling, is actually the words that come out of our mouth. So 58% of that is going to be the gestures you use, and 38% is going to be the tone of your voice and the inflection and how that comes across. So when we're expressing ourselves, we want to make sure that if we're, our gestures are going to be bigger than what we even feel comfortable with, and that we are coming across, especially when we're communicating anything with feeling. Number 4 is this idea of facilitating. So if you want to rise above distraction, you have to know how to manage things during the course of a presentation. What to do if something goes wrong. But here's the tip here. If you're going to have question and answers at the end of your presentation, do me a favor, don't end on questions and answers, because that's a very weak way of ending. And it's also, we tend to remember things as human beings, the first thing we hear and the last thing we hear. And the last thing that you never want to say is, okay, there's no more questions. So you want to make sure that you can facilitate, manage the room. And that's going to lead us to the 5th part of coming across loud. And it's this idea of being able to entertain and engage the audience. And when we say entertain, it's not acting. It's simply understanding that if you want to keep the audience engaged, you have to mix it up in this case, at least every 10 minutes. It might even be less if it's not an in-person event. But the way our brain works as human beings is that if we don't change things up a bit, every 10 minutes, literally our brain goes to sleep. We cannot concentrate on just one thing for more than that 10-minute period. So how do you mix it up? Stories, could be a question that you pose to the audience, could be a video that you play, an exercise that you have a group go through. But know that every 10 minutes you want to mix it up to keep the audience engaged and entertained through the process. So we started with impress, connect, express, facilitate, and entertain. They were the 5 parts of coming across loud and rising above distraction. The next 5 are about clarity. How do you come across clear and organize your message in a way that's effective? And it starts with this idea that when you're trying to communicate something, you have to know what your objective is, right? What are you trying to do in that presentation or in that interview or in that pitch? What's the objective that you're trying to come across? And if anyone's seen the movie City Slickers, this is Jack Palance, who tells Billy Crystal it's all about one thing, right? And so you have to find out your one thing when you're presenting, and be for sure, know that when you go in that you're going to communicate that, and that's the success of your presentation, is someone walking away with that clear objective. Here's the second part of being clear. We call it simplify. Simplify meaning that you don't want to throw the kitchen sink into the presentation. If you're going to cover main points during a presentation, you want it to be max probably 3 main points. Like for this presentation today, it was the metaphor of the silver goldfish. It was coming across loud and coming across clear. That was the 3 main points. You can have subpoints, but 3 is a magic number because our brain is programmed to be able to remember things in sets of 3. The next part of coming across clear is what we call the ability to outline your presentation. An outline is just how do you organize it in a way, or organize your time in a way that can be the most effective. And so preparing for a talk and this idea of being clear is important. What I like to share is what we call the rule of thirds. So if you're preparing for a presentation, here's what you want to do. Let's say you have 3 hours to prepare for a 10-minute talk or a half an hour talk. The idea is that you would split that time into thirds. And the first third of the time is sketching out your talk, organizing your thoughts, kind of creating a skeleton for the talk. The second hour, or the middle part, the middle third, is going to be about thinking about how are you going to illustrate to bring that talk to life. Meaning, are you going to use slides? Are there going to be props that you'll use? Are you going to use a whiteboard or a flip chart? Think about how you're going to illustrate to bring those concepts to life. And the remaining third of your time in terms of preparation is all about learning and getting familiar with your content. And so that's a matter of practicing and rehearsing. And most people think that practicing and rehearsing are the same thing. They're not. Much like you might, after a basketball practice free throw shooting, right? You're just practicing a certain element of the overarching game. Rehearsal is the exact opposite. Rehearsal means you're doing the talk from start to finish to maybe gauge your timing. Here's the thing, you need to do both. But I would tell you that if you're going to practice, where I would tell you to spend the majority of your time is practicing how you're going to start and practicing how you're going to finish. So takeoffs and landings. That's where you should spend the most of your time. But this idea of preparation is absolutely key. The fourth element of coming across clear is about the ability to visualize and bring your content to life. And a lot of times that's going to be just like I have here, slides. And here's the thing, slides actually can play a very important role in that if you just tell somebody an idea or a concept, a week later they'll have a 10% recollection of that concept. But if you do dual coding, meaning that somebody hears you say that and they also see a compelling visual, that recall can jump as high as 65%. So 10% all the way up to 65%. Using great visuals to accompany your content can really boost memorability. But you've got to use your visuals, in a way that's going to convey that. And so here is the tip. This is a photography tip. If you're thinking about any type of visual that you're going to use, you want to know what they call in photography circles this grid. You might have seen that when you've looked through a viewfinder You see where these lines intersect? These 4 places where they intersect are what are called the PowerPoints. Believe it or not, that's where PowerPoint comes from. It's a photography term. But that's where you want to place the emphasis. That's also where you might want to place text on a slide, because that's where our eye gets drawn to these 4 intersections. And if you're going to use visuals, and I'm big on visuals, not everybody is, you want to make sure that you use great images. So there's a lot of great places like pixabay.com is free images, literally millions of free images. You can even go to paid services like I use Shutterstock, Shutterstock, to get relatively inexpensive, really good images. But if you're going to use images, try to limit the amount of bullets. You know, guns don't kill presentations, bullets do. Limit the amount of text. Even if you're going to put text on the screen, just limit that amount, and try to use fonts that fit your personality or your brand. If you can, avoid using the default fonts when you present. All right, the 5th and final one that I want to talk about in Clear, and then we're going to open it up in a minute. I want to spend about 10 to 15 minutes before I finish to answer as many questions as I can about presenting skills and communication. Number 10 is this idea of staying on time. So when I was talking with Amy and the team, I said I wanted to present for roughly about 40 minutes and then have that time at the end to be able to answer questions. Finishing on time is the cardinal rule of speaking. So if you're given 15 minutes, you can always end a minute or 2 earlier, but you can never, ever go over time. There's never an excuse for going over time. So just remember that timing is important. Do yourself a favor if you obviously can wear a watch, but sometimes if you have a clicker, they have a timer built into it. You can have somebody at the back of the room or at the table where you're presenting to show you where you're at with the amount of time that you have left. But there's no excuse, even on your computer with your slides, if it's right in front of you, that has a clock. So you want to be able to manage that and finish on time. And with that, I know we've already had a couple questions that have come in. Feel free to write that into the Q&A, and we'll start to jump into it. And I'm going to jump into the first one here from Sheila. And Sheila says, if you limit bullets and text, how should you display text? Is there a character limit per slide you should aim for, or should your info be conveyed with your speaking? So a couple of things. One, don't use bullets, please. Second, I've heard it told to me that you would never want to have more than 16 words on a slide. You certainly don't, unless it's a quote, you probably don't want to have full sentences either. Because here's the challenge when we speak, is that your audience can only do one thing at a time. They can either listen to you or they can read what's on the slide. And the challenge is, Sheila, that people read typically 3 to 4 times faster than you can speak. And so if you've put a lot of text up there, they start reading. The worst thing that you can do is put 4 or 5 bullets on a slide at a time. And by the time you're finishing the first bullet, We've all done this, right? We're not listening to you. We've read 2, 3, 4, and 5 before you've gotten to the second one. So if you look at people like Steve Jobs, he might have 1, 2, or 3 words on a slide or no words at all. Just great, compelling imagery that goes with what he's speaking about. I think many times we use the slides almost as a crutch, and the worst thing that we can do is start to read from a slide, because then we've lost that engagement and connection with the audience. Great question. So let's see, I'm going to go back into the chat. We've got some questions. I've read that clients only remember 10% of a presentation over a 48-hour period, with the majority of presentations hosted over video calls with the slide deck. How can we bring the magic into a room in this era of social distancing? And I don't have the name on there, but that is an amazing question, because even if you're in a live audience, people are recalling 10%. Think about it when we're on the other side of that monitor, and this is right here, the tabs that we're competing against as a speaker. There's other stuff going on in the room, whether it's kids or eating, or you're just competing against so many other things that I think it's really incumbent upon us to try to be, if you can, as memorable as possible. Probably be shorter in the length of your presentations, because you know you have a limited bandwidth, and you've got to try to find ways to make it, especially if you could do kind of the Brady Bunch setup, ways to get the audience a little bit more involved if you can, if it's a smaller group presentation. But there's definitely a challenge of being on the other side of the glass and not feeling that what the audience is feeling as you speak, and for the audience not being around other people to kind of sense that feeling that's in the room. Great. Let me see here. Let's see. All right. Amy, I saw that one question in the chat, but maybe that was just the last one I saw. Do you have a couple others?
Yes, one of them I think you already touched upon. It was regarding your slide deck. This question was, how do you prepare a single slide deck for an audience of different knowledge levels?
Right. I think that's always going to be a challenge. I think that if you have people in the audience, and this is a great case in point right now. There are probably people on this call right now that are very seasoned presenters, and then you have others on the call that are probably just beginning, or have kind of rudimentary presenting skills. I think you've really got to know, if you can do a little bit of research into the audience. I think you have to, for the most part, try to aim for the middle or the majority, and be able to have some stuff that you can touch on, both on the beginning and the advanced. And maybe there's resources on both sides that you can supply after the talk to be able to address both of those groups. But I think you want to aim for the mean in the middle there.
And how do you know if you have enough content or the expertise to offer to be a great speaker?
So here's the thing. I think sometimes we put so much pressure on ourselves that we have to be so much smarter than the audience to have that right to be on the stage. And also sometimes we feel like we have what's called the curse of knowledge. So we just know things because we've been in an industry for so long. We think that everyone else, must know those things. And so I think it's incumbent that you have to realize, look, not everyone knows everything, right? And that it's not about just conveying information. It's about your ability to build context around it, to be able to deliver and pull out insight based on that material. And even if somebody knows some of the content, it's also important to remind them in a way how they can make it relevant and apply it to themselves. So I think as long as you can go in with a really good objective, be able to tell, I think personal stories are the best. Tell some stories that, especially if it's a personal story or something that your life that you can pull from to make the content relatable, you're going to do it in a way that's going to keep the audience engaged.
And I think you were just giving advice to a 2020 grad. I want to welcome him to the webinar. His first big step.
Right.
One of the questions is, how do you deal with a potential cynical audience?
How do you deal with a cynical audience? Well, this is probably a good, I didn't cover it in terms of facilitation, but the rule is with any type of distraction, or if you've got somebody in the audience that is being, is standing out in any unsavory way, is that you have three options, right? One is you can forget it, meaning you don't call attention to it and you just kind of work through it. And sometimes that's the best course of action. But if it rises to the level that everyone in the audience is aware of it, then you've got to try to, that distraction, you've got to try to fix it. And it could be that you just stop the presentation for a second, give everybody a 2-minute break. Maybe you address that thing or that person that's causing the issue. And then the third F, so you have forget it, you have fix it. And the third part is you can feature it, right? You can somehow weave it into your presentation and do it in a way that, look, you're just going to acknowledge and you're going to roll with it. And what I love is comedians are great at that last F of featuring it, right? They make it work for them when somebody's disruptive. And they will take that heckler or that disruptive audience member and feature it as part of their act. I tell people jokingly that there's actually a fourth F. So if you can't forget it, fix it, or feature it, the fourth F is to find somebody to blame. And just lay blame on someone else.
All right, this one isn't necessarily related to presentation skills, so I'm not sure if you want to touch upon it today or not, but what's been your biggest tool to increasing your network and getting referrals during the COVID-19 and quarantine?
So I'll give you a tip that I got a number of years ago, and it's I think it applies during COVID-19 or just in general networking. It's called the 3 I's. And it's all of these 3 I's are about providing value, but just in different ways. And so the first I is to inform. So that's simply a matter of sharing information. It could be that you wrote something or you came across a great article that you think somebody within your network or someone you want to connect with would be interested in. And so you're sharing that and informing them. The The second I is introductions. So how do you find ways to connect people as a form of networking? And so it could be that it's a resource that you use that you think somebody would be helpful for. It could be somebody that's looking for a job. You're going to introduce them to a company that they're interested in. But just being helpful by trying to make and facilitate introductions. I mean, by the end of this year, look to the right of you, look to the left of you, and one of the three of you is probably out of work. And so there's going to be a lot of room for being helpful and making introductions. And the last one is invitations. So you had inform, introduce, and invite. So invitations are simply, hey, I'm going to this event. Would you be interested? Can you pull some of your network in, throw out that invitation? Doesn't even have to be your own event. It could be just another thing that you see that's out there. But it's just a more nicer way when you can reach out to someone and provide some value. And I forget who said this quote. If you can, I think it was Zig Ziglar, if you can help people get what they want, you're going to have no problem in getting what you want. And so, always be of service. I think that's the best way of networking. Amy, we have time for maybe one or two more because I want to finish with a couple of tools and a final story.
Yes, we covered all the questions that were sent in earlier, and just if you could check your private Q&A box just to make sure we didn't miss any. I don't think they could chat with you directly, but you might have received something Q&A privately.
Okay.
Well, I think we're good.
I'm checking here. I think we're good.
All right.
By the way, I see that we had a cat and a parakeet and a rabbit. So we were covering all the pets. I love it. Was anybody on Team Goldfish, by the way?
I actually was. I was.
You were?
Yeah.
Now, did you get it at a carnival, Amy?
No, I think it was a pet store.
It was a pet store. Okay, gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
How old were you?
8, 9, or 10. And I got to tell you, it lasted a very long time. Longer than the normal goldfish. Got pretty big. I did a good job taking care of, but it was too traumatic when it passed away and it was floating in the tank. I couldn't do it again. Didn't like that sight.
You remember your goldfish's name?
No.
No. Okay. Yeah. That was that traumatic. Okay. I'm calling you out.
Have to ask Mom. Yeah.
Okay. Great. So I want to finish with a couple of resources that we created in the book. But I'm happy to I can send these to you, Amy. We can forward it to everyone. I don't want to guilt people into buying the book unless they want to go deeper into this. But what it's called, one is called the Silver Presentation Matrix. And simply, Silver becomes an acronym for kind of the 6 stages of getting ready for a presentation. So you have starting, illustrating, learning, and then you have what we call vaulting, educating, and requesting. So the vaulting, educating, and requesting is actually delivering, and these first 3 are about the preparation that you do. But the one that I'm super excited about, and I think everyone should use if they want to be effective when they present, is what we call the preparation grid. And it's simply got 18 boxes 18 boxes that you fill out as you start to organize your presentation. And it gives you a very quick way of being able to make sure that you start strong, that you finish with a call to action. So Amy, I'll forward you both of these tools so we can share that with everyone. But this is the one I really hope people would make use of, the preparation grid. And as we finish, I want to finish with a little piece of advice from this gentleman right here. If he's called the Oracle of Omaha. That's Warren Buffett, one of the most successful people in the world. And he said something pretty prophetic, which I think makes the case for why you might want to go a little deeper with your presentation skills. He says, one of the things you want to be sure to do is, whether you like it or not, is to get comfortable with speaking. He says, that's an asset that will last you 50 to 60 years. He says it's a necessary skill. And so my hope today, as we finish, that you're inspired to raise the level of your game when you present, to stand out in what I would call a sea of sameness. And our 2020 grad is not familiar with this term, but we call it the TCP, the typical corporate presentation. It is a great cure for insomnia, by the way. But why be typical when you can stand out and make this one of the skills that you can use for the rest of your life? So with that, I hope you're inspired to raise the level of your game. And thank you all for spending an hour this afternoon with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Stan. Love the screen right now. I just want to let everyone know that this was recorded and we will post it on the alumni website. I provided that link in the chat box that ultimately links over to our YouTube channel, where we've been posting all of our past webinars. So if you missed part of this, or if you know anyone who just missed it completely, Sean Kaler was one of them. Unfortunately, couldn't join us. He was on another WebEx just now. So you can go back and watch it afterward. So I wanted to let everybody know that, and you can also find any future upcoming events on the alumni website as well. But thank you very much, Stan. We love this. We can all use this information, especially right now.
I've got one bonus tip for everyone. This is the greatest tip that I've ever learned as a speaker. Stop. STOP is an acronym. It's a great tip that's in the book. We've got over 64 tips. But for single thought, one person. So the idea is, when you present, I would present a single thought to Amy, and then I couldn't start speaking next till I engaged someone else in the audience, and I delivered to them a single thought. And that what that causes you to do is to actually take a little bit of a pause between those thoughts and breathe. And it also eliminates the ands, the ums, and the so's that a lot of times that we put between our sentences. So single thought, one person, that's your bonus tip.